Well, we all know what it's like to get overwhelmed. When my mom got overwhelmed with stuff when we were growing up, she would say, "I'm just beside myself." And I think what she meant was that there was just too much of whatever she was feeling to be contained by one person. To be beside yourself is not really a good thing. But what if you're starting from a place that's not so great? Maybe then if you could get outside of yourself, if you could get out of the space of your heart and spirit, then maybe somehow you could get beside yourself and get unstuck, right? From being in the same old place. Maybe then your life could be a little better. This possibility of being beside yourself is now a new general law of physics. So theoretical biologist and complexity physicist, whatever that is, Stuart Kauffman, has proposed what he calls adjacent possible theory, or aptness, or APTness. And the idea of this adjacent possible suggests that at any given moment, there's a space around every person of untapped potential. I like that. The lure of the adjacent possible is to be able to enter into a new field of energy. In other words, there's this halo of possibility and promise around each of us, and that's what is beside ourselves. So I was thinking about my living room because I just moved it around. Most of us have living rooms, where the same furniture has been in the same place forever. And so when the house gets crowded on holidays or whatever, you kind of know where people are going to end up, right? Where the traffic flow is going to go, and where there might be traffic jams, and where the favorite spot to hang out is. Well, in Kauffman's law of the adjacent possible, it says that real change takes place when you rearrange the current configuration of things. And so it opens up these new possibilities. So when you change your furniture in the living room or wherever, everything's kind of different, right? You walk in, even if it's the same old furniture, you walk in and it has a different feel and kind of invites you to sit in a different place, and maybe the lighting's a little bit different because of the way you've rearranged things. And so without even adding, a single new chair or table, the feeling of the room changes, and people move around the room differently. And they interact in a different way, and so the energy of the room flows in a new way. And that's all just by, moving the couch. So what would happen if you can reconfigure the space of your soul, the adjacent possible, this halo of promise that lies just outside our standard zones of existence, is waiting for us to be beside ourselves. In today's gospel text that Tyree just made, the space inhabited by these 10 lepers was a truly bad place to be. They were outcasts. They were designated lepers, and so because of that, they were required to stay outside the boundaries of their communities, outside the gates of the village. Not only were they socially isolated, which may have been the worst thing that ever happened to them, but they were also required to renounce themselves to all people who passed by as unclean. It was their responsibility to keep themselves physically isolated from other human beings. Leprosy was a dreaded affliction, a common affliction in those days, so common in fact that the lepers had specific prescribed social roles, and a religious one too. The book of Leviticus spends 2 whole chapters teaching priests how to diagnose these diseases of the skin, how to pronounce lepers ritually unclean, and how to perform rites of purification if they happen to be healed. As for lepers, the one who has the disease, Leviticus says, shall wear torn clothes and let the hair of his head hang loose, and he shall cover his lips and cry, unclean, unclean, and he shall dwell alone in a habitation outside the camp. It's interesting, though, that leprosy wasn't seen as a punishment for sin, which so many sicknesses were in those days, but it was understood instead as just this inexplicable act of God, which made it all the more frightening, right? I mean, if there's nothing you did to deserve leprosy, then it follows that there's nothing you can do to avoid it, right? So lepers were shunned because their disease was contagious, certainly, but it was more than that. It was their pain and their loneliness and their unspeakable fear that no one wanted to catch, right? They were kept at a distance, barred from everything they knew and loved from their religious community, and declared unworthy even of God. They were unclean outsiders. The sad thing is that none of this was challenged by the lepers themselves. They couldn't afford, after all, to work, and so they depended upon the charity of the insiders for their livelihood. So they dressed as they were told, they spoke as they were told, they didn't cross over that line that had been drawn to separate them from those with unblemished skin. They were obedient, they followed their orders, and even when Jesus, this renowned healer of lepers, came to town, they didn't break rank. They stood at the proper distance and they said the proper things. But into this tiny, terrible world suddenly walked this one that they all recognized, a person. They recognized him not only as a person, but as a power, right? So powerful was his presence that they called out to him, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And even though these 10 men called out to Jesus for help, they could not have known that they were encountering the greatest expansion of possibilities for their future that they would ever know. Jesus could not only move them out of the space of being an outcast, but into the space of healing and wholeness. So he looked at them, he saw what anyone could see, that they were eaten up with leprosy, that they needed all the mercy they could get. He didn't touch them. There was no mud or spittle or talk of faith this time, just an order. Go and show yourself to the priest. That's what Jesus said, and that's what they did, disappearing as obediently as they had appeared in the first place. None of them seemed to ask why. There was only one reason, though, to go see the priest, and that would be to receive a diagnosis, a verdict, a clean or unclean, inside or outsider, member of the community or beggar on the outskirts of town. None of them asked why, but as they went to do what they were told to do, they were cleansed. The scabs fell away, the color returned, the feeling came back to their fingers and toes that had been numb for so many years. And 9 of them went on to do just what they were told, to have the priests in Jerusalem certify their cures and restore them back to their society. What an amazing day that must have been for them. But one of them didn't do what he was told. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned right around on his heels, cried out, and didn't rest until he lay on his face in the dirt in front of Jesus, praising God and giving thanks. He made a spectacle of himself for sure, all the more so because he was recognized as a Samaritan, a believer in the Torah as far as he was concerned, but a Gentile and a foreigner as far as the house of David was concerned. So in other words, he was a double outsider, once by virtue of his leprosy, but twice by virtue of his non-Jewish blood. A double loser, lying at the feet of Jesus and thanking God as if God were there himself. He was one of the unclean who was beside himself, seeing what the clean could not see, and who refused to be separated from what gave him new life. He couldn't separate himself from this new air that he now breathed. It's hard to say what effect that 10th leper had on Jesus, really, but something happened because all of a sudden he started asking a lot of questions, like, weren't there 10 of you here just a minute ago? Where are the other 9? Is this foreigner the only one who knows how to say thank you? And then he turned to the 10th leper and he said, rise and go your way. He said, your faith has made you well. Straight from the Greek, your faith has saved you. Well, once you stop and think about all this, it's kind of odd because Jesus did tell all 10 of them to go show themselves to the priests, and 9 of them did exactly what they were told. It was this one, in fact, who did not do what he was told. He even flaunted his disobedience with this kind of, big show of emotion. And all were healed, right? The Bible says all were healed. But this one who didn't do what he was told, this one who came back, he got special treatment. He got told his faith had made him well. But weren't all 10 of them made well? 10 were healed of their skin diseases, but only 1 was said to be saved. 10 were declared clean and restored to society, but only 1 was said to have faith. 10 set out for Jerusalem to claim their free gifts, just as they were told. Only 1 turned back and gave himself to the giver instead. 10 behaved like good little lepers, good Jews. Only 1, this double loser, behaved like a man in love. There's a lot going on here. I think I might have told you this story before, but it's a good illustration, so I hope you don't mind hearing it again. But there's this church in the Midwest that leaves its doors open 5 days a week from 9 to 5, just like the businesses around. They like to think of themselves as kind of a peace offering to their corporate neighbors. They keep it cool and dim inside. It's kind of oasis, a bit of an oasis in the middle of the city, where passersby can come and stop and just be quiet for a while, stop and look, stop and listen. But as you know, the city is full of all kinds of people, and not everyone goes into the church with godly intentions. So the church installed this closed-circuit television camera to keep an eye on the place, to make sure that no one runs off with the candlesticks or does anything unseemly in the pews, like drink or sleep or embrace. After all, you have to be sensible about these things. And then the TV monitor sits on the admin's desk in the church office, where a volunteer at the desk keeps watch on what's happening with the altar and all the things in the sanctuary. So one day the receptionist came in to the pastor concerned, and she said, "There's a man lying face down on the altar steps," she said. "I wouldn't bother you, but he's been there a long time." Every now and then, she said, he stands up and he raises his hand towards the altar, and then he lays down again. She said, "Do you think he's all right?" So 4 pastors and several staff members conferred over this matter and elected the parish superintendent to go in and check on the man. As he did so, everyone huddled around the little monitor to watch. The superintendent appeared on the screen, walked right up to the man, exchanged a few words with him, and returned to the church office. "He says he's praying." "Ah," everyone said, thanking him for his information. This went on for days. Every morning around 11, the receptionist would look up from her desk, and there he would be, prostrate before the altar, his hair in knots, his worn clothes covered with dust balls from the floor. And the janitor just cleaned around him, and the altar guild tried not to disturb him when they came to polish the silver. And the florist asked if he should leave the flowers somewhere else, but they told him no, just step over the guy and put them on the altar where they belong. The man was the subject of that week's staff meeting, I'm sure. They said, "Should we do something?" someone asked. "I don't know," said someone else. "What do you think?" "I think I want to get on that guy's prayer list," one of them said, and everyone laughed. And finally it was Sunday. And it was the senior pastor's turn to celebrate communion at the early service. And the man was there when the pastor arrived, blocking his path to the altar. And the pastor wasn't really sure what to do. I mean, maybe the guy was drunk. Surely he was crazy. What would he do if he asked him to move? So approaching him as if he were a landmine, the pastor tapped him on the shoulder. He was so skinny and dirty. "Excuse me," the pastor said, "but there's going to be a service here in a few minutes. I'm sorry, but you'll have to move." So the man lifted his forehead from the floor and spoke with a heavy accent. He said, "That's okay." And he rose and he dusted himself off in a dignified motion. And he left and he never came back. The 8 o'clock service began on time. The faithful took their places, and the pastor took his. They read their parts well. They spoke when they were supposed to speak. They were silent when they were supposed to be silent. They offered up their symbolic gifts, performed their bounden duty and service, and there was nothing wrong with that, nothing at all. They were good servants, careful and contrite sinners who had come for their ritual cleansing, but one of them was missing. The foreigner was no longer among them. He had risen and gone his way, but the place where he lay on his face for hours, making a spectacle of himself, seemed all at once so full of heat and light that the pastor stepped around it on his way out, chastened, if only for a moment, by the call to a love so excessive, so disturbing, so beyond any call to obedience that it made the pastor want to leave all his good works behind. The pastor of the church wrote this about that. That all happened a long time ago now, but what has become apparent in the meantime is that I know how to be obedient, but I don't know how to be in love. It doesn't seem to be an ability that I can command, like reflective listening or public speaking. And so I do what I know how to do, and I do it as well as I know how to do it. I read my Bible, I say my prayers, I pay my pledge. And there's nothing wrong with that, nothing at all. It's that kind of steady, law-abiding discipleship, the discipleship of the 9 lepers, that has kept the great ship of the church afloat for thousands of years. I am one of the 9, but it's the 10th leper that interests me, the outsider, the double loser who captures my imagination, the one whose disease I fear, whose passion confounds me, whom I may not see at all because he doesn't need a pastor or a priest to certify his cure. Where are the 9, Jesus asks? But I know where they are. Where's the 10th leper? That's what I want to know. Where's the one who followed his heart instead of his instructions, right? Who accepted his life as a gift and gave it back again, whose thanksgiving rose up from somewhere so deep inside him that it turned him around, changed his direction, led him to Jesus, and made him well. Where are the 9? Where is the 10th? Where is this disorderly one who failed to go along with the crowd, the impulsive one who fell on his face in the dirt, the fanatical one who loved God so much that obedience was beside the point? Where did that one go? Not that I'm likely to go after him. It's safer here with the 9. We know the rules and who does what. We're the ones on whom the institution relies. But the missing one, the one who turned back or turned away or turned against, where did he go? Who is he? And who is he with? And what does he know that we don't know? What would happen if we chose to move into the adjacent possible? What would happen if we turned around and took a hop into the holy? What would happen if we leaped into the unknown that lies just barely outside our zone of comfort and safety? Where are the 9? We're right here. But where, for the love of God and the sake of the church, is the 10th? Amen.